They said she had finally lost it the day the yellow school bus disappeared beneath the Wyoming earth. But the truth wouldn't come out until months later, when a wall of white erased the world, and the only people left alive for miles were the ones breathing inside that buried machine. Because when the worst blizzard in decades hit, when homes cracked open like eggshells and the power grid collapsed into silence, the woman they laughed at would be the one they begged to save them. And by then, it would almost be too late. Martha Keegan drove the final steel bolt into the reinforced hatch just as the late autumn wind carried the first sharp hint of winter across her land, the hollow clang echoing across her 40 acres like a warning no one else could hear. And she paused, not to admire her work, because it wasn't meant to be admired, but to listen, the same way her father had taught her decades ago when she was just a girl standing beside him on this very soil. "The land talks," he used to say. "You just have to shut up long enough to hear it." And for the past 3 years, the land had been saying something was wrong. The bus itself had started as a joke, at least to everyone else. An old district school bus, stripped of its seats, hauled in on a flatbed from 2 counties away, its faded yellow paint peeling under the Wyoming sun. And when Martha first parked it in the center of her property, people slowed their trucks just to stare, unsure if she was starting some kind of roadside attraction or finally giving in to whatever quiet madness they'd always suspected lived behind her calm eyes. But the real spectacle began when the excavator arrived, rented with cash, and Martha began digging. Not a shallow trench, but a deep, deliberate cut into the earth, wide enough and long enough to swallow the entire bus hole. Derek Halvorsen was the first to film it, of course. He had moved in 6 months earlier, a young tech entrepreneur chasing solitude and aesthetics, building a sleek solar-powered home with glass walls and smart systems that responded to his voice. And from his deck, he recorded Martha's progress with amused disbelief, posting clips of the crazy bus bunker lady to his growing online following, narrating her work like it was performance art. Day 5, he joked in one video, zooming in as Martha guided the excavator bucket with steady precision. "She's officially digging her own grave, but make it vintage public transport." The videos spread locally, then regionally, drawing laughter, comments, speculation, prepper jokes, apocalypse theories, polite concern disguised as humor. And even the old-timers at the supply store couldn't resist shaking their heads when Martha came in for materials. Industrial insulation foam, steel reinforcement ribs, waterproof sealant, hand crank ventilation units, crates of thermal blankets, and enough non-perishable supplies to last months. "You expecting the end of the world, Martha?" Old Bill Cranston asked one afternoon, leaning on the counter as he rang up her latest purchase, a coil of heavy-duty weather stripping, and she simply slid the cash across without looking up, her voice even, almost absent. "No, just a bad winter." He chuckled at that, like everyone else did, because winters were always bad out here. That was part of the deal, but Martha didn't smile back. What no one saw, what no camera caught, were the nights she spent going over her father's old journals, flipping through decades of handwritten notes about wind patterns, snowfall irregularities, livestock behavior, and the subtle signals nature gave before it turned violent, or the way she stood at the edge of her property at dusk, watching the horizon, feeling the pressure shifts in her bones the same way her father once had, or the quiet certainty that had settled in her chest like a weight. She couldn't ignore. Something bigger was coming, something none of the modern builds, or smart systems, or aesthetic glass walls were designed to survive. By early October, the trench was complete, and with a precision that bordered on ritual, Martha lowered the bus into the earth, inch by inch, until it rested below ground level. Its steel frame reinforced with additional beams she had welded herself, the interior transformed into a narrow but efficient living space. Insulated walls, storage compartments, a compact wood-burning stove rigged with a venting system that led through reinforced pipes to the surface, and a manual air circulation system that required no electricity, no automation, nothing that could fail when everything else did. Then came the ceiling, the layering of earth over the structure, packed tight, leaving only the hatch visible. A thick, steel-plated door with locking mechanisms on the inside, and 2 ventilation pipes protruding like periscopes above the soil. That was when the laughter peaked. Derek filmed the final stage, zooming in on Martha as she shoveled the last layer of dirt over the roof of the bus, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, she's done it. She buried a whole school bus. I mean, I don't know if this is genius or insanity, but either way, it's content." Down the road, a retired couple, the Whitakers, shook their heads from the porch of their modern prefab home, its wide windows designed to showcase the sweeping landscape, notwithstand it. And even they couldn't help but gossip about Martha's project, speculating about zoning violations and mental stability, while Martha herself worked in silence, checking seals, reinforcing edges, testing the hatch mechanism over and over until it moved smoothly under pressure, until it could be opened from the inside even if snow piled high above it. By November, the first snow came early, too early, and it didn't melt the way it should have, lingering in patches that hardened overnight, and the animals changed too. Deer moved lower than usual, birds disappeared sooner, and the wind, when it came, carried a sharper bite, a deeper cold that seemed to cut through layers instead of settling on top of them. And still, no one connected the signs, no one except Martha, who stocked the final supplies into the buried bus and began spending nights inside it, testing its limits, adjusting airflow, measuring heat retention, learning the space the way a soldier learns a bunker. Derek noticed the lack of lights in her cabin one evening and laughed it off on another video. "Guess she moved into the underground school system full-time," he joked, unaware that beneath the frozen ground, Martha sat in steady warmth, listening, not to silence, but to the distant, growing roar of something still weeks away, something building beyond the horizon, something that would soon turn every joke, every smirk, every dismissive glance into something else entirely. Because when the storm finally came, when the sky turned that unnatural shade of bruised gray and the wind began to scream instead of blow, there would be no time left for disbelief, only the cold, brutal realization that the woman they had called crazy had been the only one who understood what was coming, and had built something that could survive it. The storm didn't arrive like a warning. It arrived like a betrayal, sudden and absolute, turning a calm January afternoon into something unrecognizable in a matter of hours. And by the time anyone realized this wasn't just another Wyoming winter front, it was already too late to prepare, too late to leave, too late to do anything except endure what was coming. The morning had been deceptively clear, the kind of cold that felt manageable, almost routine, with pale sunlight reflecting off old snow and the wind barely whispering across the plains. And Derek Halvorsen had spent it inside his sleek glass-walled home, confident in the systems he trusted, his automated heating, his backup generator, his perfectly calibrated smart environment that adjusted itself before he even noticed discomfort. Down the road, the Whitakers had brewed coffee and watched the horizon through their panoramic windows, commenting on how peaceful everything looked, how quiet, how still. But by mid-afternoon, the sky began to change, not gradually, but all at once, shifting into a heavy, bruised gray that seemed to press downward, as if the atmosphere itself was collapsing, and the temperature followed, dropping fast, unnaturally fast, from a tolerable 15 degrees Fahrenheit to well below zero in a matter of hours, the kind of drop that made metal creak and air burn in your lungs. Then the wind came. It didn't build. It struck, slamming across the land with a force that rattled structures and stripped heat from anything exposed, carrying snow not in gentle flakes, but in violent, horizontal sheets that erased depth and distance, turning the outside world into a blinding, shifting wall of white. Power failed at 6:12 p.m., a sudden, complete blackout that rippled across the region as ice-laden lines snapped under pressure, plunging homes into darkness. And for the first time, Derek felt something he hadn't planned for: uncertainty. His systems flickered, rebooted, then failed entirely, the automated heating cutting out as the backup generator attempted to start, only to choke and stall in the brutal cold, its exposed components already freezing faster than they were designed to handle. Inside his house, the temperature began to fall almost immediately, the expansive glass panels that once framed the landscape now acting like open doors to the cold, bleeding warmth into the storm with ruthless efficiency. And Derek moved quickly at first, layering clothing, checking his phone for updates, pacing as he tried to manually override systems that were never meant to be operated this way. But the cold kept coming, seeping into the walls, the floors, the air itself. At the Whitakers' home, the situation deteriorated even faster. Their wide windows, though reinforced, weren't built for sustained impacts from debris traveling at high speeds. And when the first crack appeared, thin, almost delicate, it spread in seconds, spiderwebbing across the glass before a jagged branch, hurled by the wind like a spear, shattered through completely, exploding inward in a storm of shards and snow that instantly transformed their living room into an extension of the blizzard. Outside, panic replaced calm in an instant. They tried to seal the opening, dragging furniture, blankets, anything they could find, but the wind tore through their efforts effortlessly, the cold flooding in so violently it stole their breath, forcing them to retreat, to grab what little they could carry, and to make a decision no one should ever have to make in that kind of storm: stay and freeze, or run and hope something better existed beyond the white void. And through it all, beneath several feet of packed earth, Martha Keegan sat in the quiet, controlled warmth of the buried bus, the small interior lit by a steady, amber glow from her stove, the air stable, breathable, alive. She had already felt the pressure drop hours earlier, already sealed the hatch, already secured every latch and vent, her movements calm, methodical, without panic, because this exact moment, was what she had built for. The earth around her acted as a shield, absorbing the violence of the wind, the temperature barely fluctuating despite the chaos above. And while the storm screamed across the surface, inside the bus there was only a low, distant rumble, like thunder heard from miles away. She rationed fuel automatically, adjusted airflow with practiced ease, and listened, not to the storm itself, but for something else, something human. Hours passed. Outside, the world disappeared completely, landmarks erased, roads buried, visibility reduced to nothing, and in that endless white, Derek made his decision. He couldn't stay. The cold inside his house had dropped to dangerous levels, his breath visible in thick clouds, his fingers stiff despite gloves, and the silence, the dead, suffocating silence without power, pressed in on him harder than the storm. He remembered Martha then, remembered the buried bus, the ridiculous project he had mocked for months, and the thought came to him not as logic, but as instinct. Underground meant warmth, meant protection, meant survival. He grabbed what he could, his coat, a flashlight already dimming in the cold, and forced his way outside, immediately swallowed by the storm, the wind hitting him like a physical force, stealing his balance, his direction, his sense of space. Each step was a fight, snow already piling high enough to drag at his legs, the cold biting through layers with terrifying speed. And still he pushed forward, aiming for where he thought Martha's land was, though the landscape had become unrecognizable, distorted by drifts and shadow. Not far away, the Whitakers had made the same desperate choice, leaving their shattered home behind, moving blindly through the storm with nothing but instinct and fading strength, their bodies already beginning to fail under the relentless cold. And beneath it all, Martha waited, listening, her head tilting slightly as a faint, irregular sound broke through the muted roar above, a dull, desperate thumping against the hatch, so faint it could have been mistaken for debris. But she knew better, because she had planned for this too, had expected that when everything else failed, when comfort and technology and modern design collapsed under the weight of reality, people would come looking for something simpler, something stronger, something buried beneath the surface where the storm couldn't reach. And this time, she didn't hesitate. The sound at the hatch wasn't steady. It came in bursts, weak, frantic, then fading, as if whoever was outside was running out of strength faster than time allowed. And Martha Keegan moved the moment she was certain it wasn't debris, her body already in motion before doubt could form, because hesitation in conditions like this didn't cost minutes, it cost lives. She sealed the interior stove, secured her gloves, and climbed the narrow ladder to the reinforced hatch, her movements precise, controlled, the result of weeks spent rehearsing this exact scenario. And when she threw the locking bar aside and forced the hatch upward, the storm exploded inward in a violent rush of wind and snow that clawed at her face and stole the heat from the space in seconds. But she held it open just long enough to drag the first figure inside. a shape barely recognizable, as human beneath the ice and frost. Then the second, both collapsing into the narrow entry space in a tangle of limbs and frozen fabric. It was the Whitakers. Their skin was pale, almost gray, lips cracked and blue, movements erratic and weak, their bodies deep in the grip of hypothermia. And Martha didn't waste time with questions, slamming the hatch shut, locking it tight, and dragging them down into the main compartment where the warmth hit them like a shock, their bodies reacting with violent shivering that bordered on seizure. "Layers off," she ordered, her voice firm, cutting through their confusion, already pulling blankets from storage, already heating water, already shifting into the rhythm of survival that left no room for panic. And as they struggled to respond, fumbling with frozen zippers and stiff fingers, one of them managed to choke out words through chattering teeth. "Derek." He tried to make it to his truck, and Martha froze for the briefest fraction of a second, not out of fear, but calculation, her mind already mapping distance, wind direction, time elapsed. Then she moved again. She secured the Whitakers as best she could, wrapped in dry layers, positioned near the stove, given small, controlled sips of warm liquid, and without another word, she geared up for the outside. This part was the most dangerous, the margin for error almost non-existent, but it was also the part she had prepared for with the most care. She clipped a thick guide rope to the reinforced anchor beside the hatch, looping the other end securely around her waist, a lifeline that would be the only thing keeping her from vanishing into the white void. And she grabbed her thermal scope, the device cold in her gloved hands, as she climbed back up and forced the hatch open once more. The storm hadn't weakened. It had intensified, the wind screaming across the land with relentless force, the cold so sharp it felt like needles driving through every exposed inch of skin, and visibility was non-existent, the world reduced to a swirling chaos of white and shadow. Martha stepped into it anyway. The rope paid out behind her as she moved, each step deliberate, leaning into the wind, her body fighting for balance against gusts that threatened to knock her off her feet. And without the rope, without that single line connecting her to the shelter, she knew she would be lost within seconds. She raised the thermal scope, sweeping it across the landscape, the storm interfering with the signal but not completely obscuring it. And for a moment, there was nothing, just cold, endless cold. Then, faint and flickering near the shape of Derek's truck, a small, dim heat signature. Not moving. Martha didn't hesitate. She followed the rope out as far as she dared, then anchored it and pushed further, committing to the direction, her boots sinking deep into drifts that reached her thighs, her breath burning in her lungs with every step. And when she reached him, Derek was barely conscious, curled against the side of his truck, half buried in snow, his jacket unzipped, his hat missing, his body already slipping into the final stages of hypothermia where the mind betrays itself into a false sense of warmth. She didn't check for a response. There was no time. She hauled him up with practiced efficiency, shifting his weight across her shoulders, and turned back toward the rope, her only path home. The return was slower, harder, every step a fight against exhaustion and the storm's relentless force, Derek's weight dragging at her strength, the wind howling as if it sensed weakness, but she kept moving, one hand gripping the rope, one step at a time, focusing only on the next pull, the next breath, the next moment, until finally, through the blur of snow and strain, her boot struck solid ground near the hatch. She forced it open, dragged Derek inside, and sealed it shut behind them, cutting off the storm once more. Inside the boss, the contrast was immediate. Warmth, stillness, life. And Martha got to work without pause, laying Derek near the heat, removing his frozen layers, starting the slow, careful process of rewarming that had to be controlled to avoid shock. Her hands steady, her movements precise, while the Whitakers watched from their blankets, their earlier disbelief replaced by something deeper, something heavier than gratitude. It took hours, long, tense hours where every breath Derek took felt uncertain. But eventually, signs of life returned, faint at first, then stronger, his body fighting its way back from the edge. Above them, the storm raged on for another 2 days, burying the land, destroying everything that wasn't built to endure it. But beneath the earth, inside the buried bus that everyone had laughed at, for people survived, alive not because of luck or technology, or last-minute decisions, but because one woman had seen what was coming and had the courage to prepare for it when no one else would. And when the storm finally passed and rescue teams reached the area, they didn't find a bunker, or a shelter, or even a miracle. They found proof, half hidden beneath the snow, marked only by a steel hatch and 2 frozen pipes, that sometimes the difference between madness and wisdom is nothing more than time, and the willingness to listen when the world is trying to warn you.